If our sleep is limited, our health and daytime potential is significantly reduced, if not destroyed. With adequate sleep and its concomitant brain activity, the world is our oyster. A pretty good deal for something that is enjoyable to do and doesn't take much, if any, effort. Asleep in the fast lane. Before Thomas Edison's invention of the electric light in 1879, most people slept 10 hours each night, a duration we've just recently discovered is ideal for optimal performance. When activity no longer was limited by the day's natural light, sleep habits changed. Over the next century, we gradually reduced our total nightly sleep time by 20% to 8 hours per night. But that's not nearly the end of the story. Recent studies indicate that Americans now average 7 hours per night, approximately 2.5 hours less than ideal. Amazingly and foolishly, 1/3 of our population is sleeping less than 6 hours each night. Are we losing our minds? In just the last 20 years, we have added 158 hours to our annual working and commuting time, the equivalent of a full month of working hours. According to Dr. William Dement, professor of medicine at Stanford University, working mothers with young children have added 241 hours to their work and commuting schedules since 1969. Those who also provide care for aging parents who may have age-related sleep problems might be doubly vulnerable to loss of sleep. We now live in a 24-hour society, a rat race, where sleep is not valued, with heavy demands of work, household chores, parenting and family responsibilities, and a desire for social life, exercise, and recreation. 4 out of every 10 of us are cutting back on sleep to gain time for what seems more important or interesting. This can be an extremely costly and dangerous mistake. Stop sleeping altogether and you will die. Large periods of sleep deprivation is often occur in brainwashing of war captives or cult members. It can cause even heroically patriotic citizens to denounce their own nations and ideals, to sign patently false declarations, and to join political movements that have been lifelong anathemas to them, notes Jane Allen Hobson, professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. People who, by choice or because of work, illness, or force of circumstance, go without sleep for 5 to 10 days become irrational, paranoid, confused, and even hallucinatory. Few of us are subjected to such extreme sleep loss, but most of us consciously or unconsciously, occasionally, if not chronically, deprive ourselves or others of adequate sleep. Can we adapt to minimal sleep without feeling drowsy and experience a decline in mood and performance? On a day the White House planned to bask in good economic news, President Clinton instead exploded in anger at reporters' questions. Within an hour of his comments, Clinton summoned the reporter, Bill Plant of CBS News, to apologize for losing his temper. Clinton said he hadn't been sleeping much since the July 17 crash of TWA Flight 800. Let's look at some statistics. High school and college students are among the most sleep-deprived people in our population. 30% fall asleep in class at least once a week. On November 25, 1991, when President George Bush spoke at an Ohio high school, at least a third of the high school students were clearly asleep in the overheated auditorium. If these students can't stay awake for the president, it's no wonder teachers can't keep them awake. 31% of all drivers have fallen asleep at the wheel at least once in their lifetime. The National Sleep Foundation reports that each year on our highways, at least 100,000 accidents and 1,500 fatalities, the equivalent of 4 fully loaded Boeing 747 airplanes, are due to falling asleep at the wheel. This is a very conservative estimate, as most states do not keep adequate statistics. The actual annual figures might be as high as 200,000 accidents and 5,000 fatalities, the equivalent of 12 fully loaded 747s. In addition to the tragic loss of lives, these accidents cost American society more than $30 billion annually. In 1990, a high school student in New Hampshire who had been named America's safest teen driver fell asleep at the wheel around 5 p.m., drifting over the yellow line into oncoming traffic. He killed himself and the 19-year-old female driver of another car. According to his father, safe driving was an obsession with him. The question of why he didn't recognize the fatigue and respond to it is something we will never know. The transportation industry is being hit hard by the ravages of sleep deprivation on the highways, the rails, and at sea, and in the air. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, fatigue is the number one factor that detrimentally impacts the ability of pilots. In the PBS television documentary Sleep Alert, a Boeing 747 captain noted, "It is not unusual for me to fall asleep in the cockpit, wake up 20 minutes later and find the other two crew members totally asleep." In another report, a Boeing 757 captain told how his forehead hit the control column on his approach to New York's Kennedy Airport as the need for sleep became overwhelming. Even airline passengers are now exempt from the effects of sleep deprivation. Job demands are forcing business executives and government officials to operate well beyond the design specifications of the human brain and body. They undertake exhausting schedules, whisk across multiple time zones, and work long days. Often suffering from the debilitating effects of jet lag, these people's health and performance are put in jeopardy. Dr. Martin Moore Eid, a professor of physiology at Harvard Medical School and an expert on circadian rhythms and sleep, described President Bush's grueling schedule of 16-hour days on the backside of the clock during a 10-day visit to Japan. It is 5:30 a.m. in Washington, D.C., but Bush has already put in a long day in Tokyo. Suddenly, under the unforgiving eye of the TV cameras, he vomits, collapses, and slides under the table at a banquet with the Japanese Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa, where Bush is the guest of honor. His biological clock was still set somewhere in mid-Pacific and had not yet joined him in Japan. He became just one more victim of the human drive to reach beyond our physiological capacities. 20% of all employees work at night and suffer disproportionately from drowsiness, gastrointestinal, and cardiovascular problems, infertility, depression, and accidents. 56% of shift workers fall asleep on the job at least once a week. The Wall Street Journal reported that $70 billion is lost per year in productivity, accidents, and health costs as a result of workers' inability to adjust to late-night work schedules. For example, the near-cataclysmic nuclear accidents at Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island all occurred in the early morning hours, during one of two periods in the 24-hour day when we are most fatigued. The disasters all started because night shift workers missed or were confused about warning signals on their control panels. Medical residents and interns are among the most severely sleep-deprived individuals. Many work more than 130 hours per week in shifts of 12 to 60 hours duration, and every other night they are on call. They may be responsible for the care of 40 to 60 patients. Sometimes mistakes are made, fatal mistakes. An 18-year-old woman died after a night of inattentive care by fatigued and inexperienced residents in one of New York's major teaching hospitals. A Manhattan grand jury concluded that the patient had received woefully inadequate care and had suffered repeated mistakes by first-year interns and second-year residents who had little sleep. We are biologically ill-prepared to function on minimal sleep. Our prehistoric genetic blueprint for sleep has not evolved quickly enough to keep up with the pace of our frenetic society that runs 24 hours a day. As Dr. Moore Eid asserts, if we operated machinery the way we are now operating the human body, we would be accused of reckless endangerment. According to recent Gallup surveys, 56% of the adult population now reports daytime drowsiness as a problem. The cost of sleep deprivation is nothing short of devastating in terms of wasted education and training, impaired performance, diminished productivity, loss of income, accidents, illness, the quality of life, and the loss of life. Are you victimizing yourself and endangering the welfare of your family and your career by not getting adequate sleep? Sleep disorders. Even when we're exhausted and give in to our body's demands for rest, sleep can be elusive. Being stressed, harried, and hurried can make it difficult for us to fall asleep or stay asleep. Or we may be struggling with one of more than 80 disorders of the sleeping waking state that have been identified by sleep researchers. Insomnia. In 1995, a Gallup poll found that 49% of American adults were suffering from insomnia and other sleep-related disorders, a 15% increase since 1991. According to many medical specialists, sleep disorders collectively constitute the number one health problem in America. The National Sleep Foundation attributes this to the increasingly frantic pace of life, work pressures, and an aging population. Sleep apnea. 30 million Americans suffer from sleep apnea or temporary cessation of breathing, a potentially life-threatening disorder. If you have a serious case of sleep apnea and take a sleeping pill or drink too much alcohol on a given night, you might well induce the longest rest of all. You could die in your sleep. Astonishingly, 95% of people with sleep disorders are undiagnosed and untreated and must struggle through the day feeling unmotivated and exhausted. For example, a businessman asked to testify in a public hearing held by the National Commission on Sleep Disorders Research described his intolerable life before finally being diagnosed and treated for sleep apnea. I was experiencing constant daytime drowsiness. I would fall into a deep sleep for short periods during meetings, conversations, and public functions. At times, I could awaken and make a very inappropriate comment, only realize that I was commenting on a dream I had just experienced. My associates began to question my mental stability. It was my practice in those days to carry a large pin or penknife with which I would stab myself in the leg, arm, or hand just to stay awake in meetings and while driving. I was removed from 3 successive jobs within a year and a half. My income was reduced by 85% and my savings were all used up. Costs of sleep disorders. The direct costs of sleep disorders and sleep deprivation for 1990 alone were estimated at $15.9 billion. Indirect costs in terms of productivity and accidents were said to be $150 billion. Neither of these figures takes into account the incalculable costs of suffering, family dysfunction, and the loss of human life. A young mother whose daughter died from sudden infant death syndrome, which is linked inextricably to sleep, stated, "The day after Christmas I found her dead and her bassinet." No words can adequately describe the shock, horror, and pain of a parent at such a moment. To hold the cold, stiff body of your infant offspring is to receive an unexpected blow, your own future deleted. To think that this repeats itself 7,000 times per year, one baby every hour. Even though half of American adults have trouble sleeping, physicians rarely ask their patients how they sleep. Less than 1% of case histories taken by doctors during routine physical examinations even include a mention of sleep. This is alarming because so many people are suffering needlessly. Do you ever have difficulty sleeping? Might you have a sleep disorder? Should we place more value on sleep? As a result of changing lifestyles, increased work, family and financial pressures, and a stressed out or aging population with a correspondingly higher incidence of sleep disorders, more than 100 million Americans are by definition chronically sleep deprived. The number of Americans who report trouble sleeping has risen 33% in just the last 5 years. Half of our adult population is studying, working, parenting, and playing while exhausted. We make costly mental errors. We are accident prone. We get sick too often. We have become a nation at risk. What's more, all technologically advanced societies are experiencing the same disastrous phenomenon, and the problem, if untreated, will grow. We do not understand the need for sleep and the consequences of sleep deprivation. we must learn to value sleep as much as we value the importance of proper nutrition and exercise. To become peak performers, we must change our habits so we can emerge from the fog of sleepiness to which we have become habituated. We must learn to power sleep. Learning about sleep. Why has there been so much ignorance about sleep? The topic is rarely taught in educational settings and until recently has not been part of the medical school curriculum. Not until 1996 did the American Medical Association recognize sleep medicine as a specialty. It is no small wonder that most of us know little about the importance of sleep, the incredibly varied activity that occurs during the course of each night, sleep disorders and the role of sleep in determining subsequent alertness. Even sleep researchers are just beginning to fully comprehend the mysteries of sleep and its powerful consequences for the quality of life. In Power Sleep, I share important discoveries from sleep laboratories throughout the world to increase your awareness of the importance of sleep, help you determine your individual sleep requirement, show you how to establish good sleep habits, improve your alertness, mood, productivity, quality of life, and possibly increase your lifespan. Don't get too uptight about a little sleep loss from time to time, but if you're often sleep deprived, feel sluggish, and drowsy during the day, you are not performing at a level close to your potential. I'll try to help by following the advice in this book. You will be able to use the power of sleep to prepare your mind for peak performance. You will become a different person. The person you, your parents, your spouse, your children, and your brothers always wanted you to be. You should find the material in this book interesting and full of invaluable suggestions. If not, it will put you to sleep, which is perhaps even more helpful.